This boy over here who is doing a very cute pose in the background. His name is Legolas.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, so we're definitely a bit of a talking sense ourselves here.
Hello, you metal pilgrims, and welcome on this new interview episode with nobody else but Charlotte Wessels. Once again, Charlotte, thank you so much for finding time and joining me. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm fine, thanks. So how about yourself?
I'm good. Well, I'm in Ukraine, so I'm as good as I can possibly be here these days, of course. But, I shouldn't complain. That's what I always say. Yeah.
That's a strong statement. I can imagine that it's I want to say that it isn't easy, but it feels like the most big understatement ever.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Where are you at, by the way, these days?
I am in my basement home studio. It's a bit of a mess because we've been rehearsing and things are it's a bit of a mess. But I'm in my basement.
Now, you should see some other messes if you think that this is a mess. This is pretty awesome.
Again, maybe it's not that bad.
Well, Charlotte, obviously the biggest news about your world these days is the release of your new studio album, The Obsession, which will be out in just a couple of days, September 20th. So first of all, congrats on finishing it up. I know it can be tough these days. So can you tell us a little bit about the creative process behind it? Just overall, how it all came to this one very coherent, I have to say, piece that most people will be able to hear in a week or so.
Yeah, of course. So I think the way to describe what I've done with this album is kind of by looking back at the previous ones as well. I know that a lot of people have commented on how eclectic those were and experimental. And they were, like the two Tales from 6 Feet Under records, they were the result of me experimenting here in the basement, teaching myself production, and started just as a side project from the lane, like to have whatever songs that didn't fit what I was doing there. So yeah, and those were the results of me doing a Patreon where I release a song every month. So that was kind of the process before. But then for this album, I think it was around the release of Tales from 6 Feet Under Volume 2 that I was already thinking, like, this was a lot of fun. Like, I've done a lot of different genres. I've done a lot of experimenting. But now I feel like making something like a real traditional album effort again, with a start and a finish, songs that were written to be on an album together, because on the compilation albums, they weren't written like intended to be on an album or on an album together. And I wanted this to be very different. I wanted it to be very intentional, and I wanted it to be, as I said, like, I'm glad you think it's cohesive. I wanted it to be cohesive in sound. And most importantly, I have been, like, I was planning at that point for like the first shows that I would be doing with the new live band. And that is the band that is now on the album. And when we were preparing for those live shows, I felt like, this is so cool. And it gave me so much energy. And so I started also writing with the idea that whatever songs would make it to the album, that they would play them on the album, and that we would hopefully then perform them live together. So that also really kind of influenced and guided what kind of songs I then wrote. And then, the first part of the process was just me in the basement working on the songs, putting the first versions on Patreon. And whereas for the previous two albums, that was where it finished, for this album, we then kind of went into this rearrangement and recording process with the band. And I think that put a big mark on the record that you hear today.
We actually spoke to you 2 years ago, in 2022, when you were about to release, I think, volume two back then. And You said an interesting phrase back then. You said that you've got quite a lot of messages from your diehard fans asking you whether you hate metal now. I remember that.
I know.
So I mean, and I cannot really say that this new album is a full-scale metal album, but it is, at least in parts, much heavier than its predecessor. Why is it so? Do you feel like this longing to come back to the heavier music, or did it just come to you naturally?
I think more than me making a decision now to make heavier music again, I think that it was more that for the previous two albums, for many reasons, but also just because of circumstances, I chose not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole all the songs on the first Tales from 6 Feet Under records were made when, when I was still in Delane.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was still holding on to any heavier songs, to maybe bring to new Delane songwriting sessions. So the first songs that I put out on Patreon, they were very intentionally everything but metal.
Mm-hmm.
Because, why would I put out metal songs alone if I had the band? So, and then I think for the second record, like I already started to do songs that could in theory be heavier. Like there are several songs on there like Human to Ruin or The Phantom Touch or that are heavier in its potential. But also because the way that I recorded it, with the digital instruments, I like the songs the way they are, but in terms of heaviness, they didn't find their full potential because, I made choices to put, like, for example, the vocals much louder there because, if you put like the plug-in guitars too loud, you will hear that they're plug-in guitars. So it's, so yeah. And of course that is kind of a limitation that I didn't have on this record because I knew that, the band would be there to record all this and, in some cases also work on the arrangements. So that was an absolute luxury. And yeah. I asked myself like the question for this record, like, if you want a cohesive sound, that means that you kind of want to work a little bit more focused. So if you want to be enjoying yourself the upcoming time, you have to make the music that you really want to make. And the obsession is the result of that.
Well, I can absolutely agree regarding the orchestrations on this particular album. I think they're wonderful. One of my pleasures, not guilty, I'm absolutely not guilty of this, is Muse, and it has always been. And I feel like on this record at parts, especially on like The Crying Room, for example, you can really feel, a little bit of the same energy, the same feel that Muse has, at least to me. Maybe it just came out of nowhere. I don't know if you even listened to that.
Muse is definitely one of the bands that I've been listening to a lot. Like in the years when I started to really obsess about music, Origin of Symmetry, when that came out. Yeah. I remember I was watching TV with my older brother and we saw Plug-in Baby come on to MTV, and we literally, as soon as the song was over, we hopped on our bikes and went to the local shopping mall and we got the CD together of our shared money because we needed to have this, So I can definitely be influenced by Muse. As for the orchestrations, I've worked with Vikram Shankar for the orchestrations for this album. In the beginning, I thought maybe on one or two songs I do like some additional orchestrations, but as soon as I worked with him, I liked what he did so much that in the end I sent him all of the songs, and I'm very happy I did.
You spoke about it being, we started speaking about it being cohesive, and it is definitely, at least to me, one of those records. I was able to listen to it obviously for several times already for the past couple of weeks, but it is one of those records that once you put one song on, you kind of want to listen to it in its entirety. I mean, the songs are different, but they flow from one to another. I cannot really call it a concept album or anything like this musically, but it still feels very cohesive. So, and I just realized while talking to you that, I never actually listened to one single track of it by itself as a standalone. Which is very different from modern music tendencies when people are trying to release specifically singles to, be placed in playlists on Spotify and try to go viral or something like this. Have you had that in mind, that it might affect the overall results of this album, that it is not done in this conventional modern way?
I'm very happy to hear that the album works well, like as a full listening experience. Still, the way that I write the songs, I still do the song of the month on Patreon. So I make a new song every month, and I incorporated that into the writing process for this album. So all of the songs that you hear on the album, their very first version is living on Patreon for a while now.
Awesome.
So patrons, they know where the song comes from, and they now get to hear what happened in the rest of that process, of tackling the song with the band. And since I do work on the songs as separate entities for that very goal. Like when I put out the song of the month, I rarely put out something that doesn't work as a standalone song. So I think that's maybe one of the good parts about doing it in this way, that you kind of zoom in and zoom out, like big picture, small picture, like on the song as kind of a standalone entity, and then as a song as the whole in an album. And whereas I'm glad that, the songs work on an individual level, it's really cool to hear that you think that that it has that flow to it, because that was definitely one of the goals setting out for this record, to have it in that sense be really different from like the Tales records, for example.
And I'm saying that they will not work as singles, because I just realized that to myself, as maybe because I'm a little bit old school in my consumption patterns. I still collect vinyl, and I still, listen to it regularly from the very beginning until the end. Maybe that's why, but that's how I felt about it. So regarding this Patreon thing, how much of an input from your patrons do you usually listen to when crafting music? If you release an early version, I assume they comment on it. How much of the input they actually have on your next album?
They're always really nice. So it's not like they say, "Hey, you know what? I would change that little thing if I were you." Like, I haven't gotten one of those yet. But of course you can kind of tell when you put out a song and everyone's like really excited about it, or when it's a kind of song, and this is also fine. Like, you also have these kind of songs where, a handful of people are like over the moon with it. And yeah, then you can see like, okay, this is not an all people pleaser. Does it influence me in... Like, I try to stay pretty close to myself when it comes to taking these creative decisions. Especially because for the album, again, because it's written as an entire album, I also feel like, yeah, but it's also, the song is going to play a role in the album. Like, I also don't like all songs having the same energy level. But anyway, I do think that it influences me in the sense that if, for example, I would put a song out and everyone was like super excited about it, then it's hard to dismiss that. Then I would feel like, okay, maybe I do have to put this one on the album, And on the other hand, if everyone would say, "Oh, we absolutely hate it," again, they're very nice, so they haven't yet. But if they would say that, I think that I kind of would scratch my head and go like, wait, what's wrong with it, But so far, it's mostly motivating. Or sometimes what I also do is like, I put out a song, and since I do the song every month, sometimes I have a lot of time, sometimes I don't have a lot of time. Most of these days I don't have a lot of time. And for example, I will put it out with just piano and vocals, for example, and I say, okay, so for the arrangement, like what it's going to be later on, I can kind of imagine something like this or like this. And sometimes everyone will be like, yeah, that would be great. But other times some people say, you know what, I actually really like the piano version, so maybe it should remain. So these kind of things is, yeah. But it's nice to have that kind of sounding board of people who are encouraging,
and it is the community of your fans already, so it's kind of your direct audience that you're talking to and and communicating with, basically in a live format. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. Are there any particular lyrical themes which are running through this album that you wanted to underline?
Yeah, so it wasn't really intentional starting out with this album, but I remember at one point I sat down and I was like, okay, so what are the songs on this album about? And I wrote it down like on a piece of paper. Like I gave myself one sentence for every song. And that was when I kind of found out in retrospect that almost all of the songs are about fear or obsessive thoughts or like the escapes from fear. And so I didn't set out to make like a concept record or anything. But in the end, that was very much a red thread going through the album. So this is also something, like first I kind of had to decide, like, do I want that? Do I actually want that to be a theme on the album? Because it's sort of vulnerable. It's
personal, maybe.
It's very personal, and if I want to be explicit about what it is about, then I'll have to talk about it. So I made a conscious decision there. Like, am I willing and ready to do that? In the end, I decided yes. And then it was mostly a matter of in the track list making sure that it was sort of like, I don't mind being sort of dark in the songs, but I usually, and this has always been the case, I usually do like for there to be sort of a light at the end of the tunnel. So for this song, I thought it would be a good thing to end on Vigor and Valor and Soft Revolution, because they're both like, Vigor and Valor is really like a call for courage, a call for strength, mental and physical. And Soft Revolution is about, being scared and doing it anyway. So the album is very much about that fear. On the album, though, in the end, it's kind of like a call to arms, like an encouragement to not be scared, but to go ahead and do the thing anyway.
Well, as a person who, just like the close to 40 million people, others just like myself, have been living in this constant mode that you just described for the past 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, I can very much resonate with it. I'll be honest with you. And maybe that's why I had those two songs. Those are the only two songs that I kind of had on repeat a little bit more than the rest of the album, possibly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah,
I had this one reality check in February when I was on this writing camp. It was a residency. It was an international residency, and there were musicians from Germany, from Poland, and from Ukraine. And I was feeling very, very, very low. That I was half crying all of the time, and I was so deep into it. And then there was a round where people were asking each other, like, how do you feel? And the Ukrainian musician, she goes by Bandura Girl. She played the Bandura.
I know her. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, I feel like shit. And she was like, I'm afraid I'll lose my hands in the war. And I was like, oh, it was such a, yeah, it was such a reality check also for me with my concern, and then to relate that to, you know, her who is like making these cultural crossovers which are so important now, you know, and then the fear that her actual tool to do that is taken away through this war. Well, I was going to say unimaginable, but for you it's not unimaginable. So this is very tragic, and I applaud all of you for being in that state, and well, you having the mental demeanor that you seem to showcase today. Yeah, that's very strong.
Thank you, Charlotte. Now, sometimes I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I fake it until I make it, just like most of us do. But most of the times, this is the only way for you to stay sane during such times. You have to be strong. You have to push through. You have to do what you love. We are like hobbits. You know, I'm a huge Tolkien nerd, as you can see from. And we are like hobbits. We will defend our way of living no matter what.
This boy over here who is doing a very cute pose in the background. His name is Legolas.
Ah, nice.
Yeah, so we're definitely a bit of a Tolkien fans ourselves here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And thank you so much for your word. Going back to the album, the two, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are two only featuring, or only, two songs with a feature artist there, but those are ALISSA WHITE-GLUZ and Simons, who are both incredible. And having you three on the same record is always, you know, it's always a pleasure to my ears. How was it working with that? And why did you decide to ask specifically, you know, these lovely ladies to join you on this record? And have they had any input on the songs that you've performed together?
Yeah, so Dopamine, as for Dopamine, like the song itself is about kind of my experience of I of some side effects of medication I was taking on a type of antidepressant. And actually, the very first time I opened up about that publicly, Simone reached out to me. She was like, you know, hey, let's talk, which was very kind of her. And we connected a lot after that. And we also did some really cool collaborations after that. And when I put the very first version of Dopamine, which is about this topic that we kind of bonded over, when I put that on Patreon, because we follow each other on Patreon as well. When I put that on Patreon, she said like, oh, I've been listening to it on repeat and I like it so much. So then I thought, you know, if this is coming on the record, I would love for her to sing it with me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you know, so that was really cool. And that kind of had like, it felt really personal and it felt really right. Of course, you know, the song was already written, but with a vocalist like her, I do feel like if she's singing it and she wants to take it elsewhere, you know, be my guest. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But I think that she stayed pretty close to the lines, and I think that I'm so happy with her performance of the song. Like the second verse that she did, like it gives me goosebumps. So that was really cool. And then as for Ode to the West Wind with ALISSA, we've done many collaborations over the last years. I think this is our fifth.
Yeah.
So yeah, because we met back in 2013 and we kind of have been doing collaborations on and off ever since. And one thing that is very typical about our collaborations is that 4 out of 5 of those are based, the lyrics of the song are based on famous poems. And Ode to the West Wind is based on a poem called Ode to the West Wind by Percy Shelley. And I didn't have her on the first Patreon version of the song either, but yeah, I dropped it on Patreon, and then I thought this kind of should have had been like the next chapter in our kind of series of poetry-based collaborations. And I asked her whether she wanted to join, and I could already kind of imagine where like her voice would go, and especially also where her screams would go, like in the bridge. So yeah, and again, I absolutely love what she did, and we recorded a video for it too, and that was very nice because so far we've done like so many collaborations, like from a distance, like her working from whatever side of the globe she was at that moment. But we actually got to get together for the video recordings, which was very cool, and I'm expecting to see some results like any minute now. So that's exciting.
This is incredible. Hopefully you guys will be able to perform it live, both of those songs, on the upcoming tour.
Yeah.
It'll be incredible. I know it's really hard to work out all the schedules for you, but maybe if at some festival or something like this, you'll intersect. That'll be nice. They're really cool.
Yeah, it would be really cool. We've had a couple of times in the past where, our paths crossed.
Yeah.
In beautiful, beautiful coincidences. So let's hope.
Well, Charlotte, I can talk about music literally forever. It's my biggest passion in the world. But there is a time limit to these things, and I assume you have a next interview that you kind of have to run to. But so for the second time, I want to say that it was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the new video, which will be out hopefully soon, and hearing the fans' reaction to this album, which in my opinion is the strongest out of the solo records you've released so far, and I enjoyed it very, very much. So any last message for your fans? Anything you wanted to share with them?
I just wanted to say thank you for people who've been following along and seeing what's going on. I really appreciate it. I don't take any of it for granted. Yeah, I wish everyone strength and all of the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was Charlotte Wessels, and her new studio album, The Obsessions, will be out on the 20th of September via Napalm Records. Make sure to check it out if you're a fan, and if you're not, definitely check it out still. Charlotte, thank you so much for finding time and joining me. Keep rocking.